and happy Infrastructure Week to you. My name is Neil Aft, Editorial Director of Transport Topics. I want to welcome you to the TT Live on Web for May. Our focus today will be the state of the nation's infrastructure and the highway funding crisis. I am joined on set here by Pat Thomas, Vice President of Global Affairs for UPS and First Vice Chairman of American Trucking Associations, Paul Ballmer, Legislative Assistant for Representative Earl Blumenauer, and Eugene Malero, Transport Topics Washington reporter. Additionally, we have pre-recorded interviews from Martin Daum, President of Daimler Trucks North America, and Carlo Braceras, Executive Director of the Utah Department of Transportation. Our sponsors for today's chat are Ryder and Clean Energy. Additional information about these companies can be found at the bottom of this article page. We want to encourage you to interact with us during today's chat. You can email us at share@ttnews.com or by commenting directly on this article page. Okay, let's get started. Eugene, I want to begin with you. Thanks for joining us today. There's a lot of information out there. It is a very fluid situation. Wondering if you can bring us up to speed with the latest updates on the funding situation as we approach the upcoming deadline.
Well, Neil, thank you. And Infrastructure Week is happening at a time when we have 8 legislative days before Transportation Funding Authority is set to expire on May 31st. So Congress has 8 legislative days to resolve that situation. And what we're hearing from congressional leaders on the Republican side is that they're working on a short-term patch of somewhere between $10 to $11 billion to keep federal highway programs funded through December. If that is approved and signed into law, the thinking from some of these Republican leaders is that it's going to give the transportation policy authorizers time to work on a long-term bill before December, and they can have that ready after December. So as of right now, there is no funding fix that we know of. The 2 key players are Chairman Paul Ryan of the House Ways and Means Committee and Senator Orrin Hatch, a Republican of Utah. They're both the top tax policy writers in Congress, and they have not told reporters, and right now none of us really know what they're thinking of doing. But that short-term patch to get us through December, that is what a lot of people are talking about.
So thank you, Eugene. We'll be back with you shortly. Pat, I next want to turn to you. Thank you for taking the time to join us in studio today. Sure. I know that you were already downtown this morning at a different Infrastructure Week event. You were included in a press release that was put out earlier today also by ATA regarding the funding situation. Wondering if you can share your perspectives on how you see this playing out, and obviously share some thoughts from trucking's perspective, what they hope that will happen in the coming weeks and possibly months.
Sure, Neil, and it's great to be with you here today, and I appreciate the opportunity to join you. I was, in fact, downtown this morning and met with a host of state legislators who are involved in their transportation committees in each of their respective states, and they too express a good deal of frustration, much like we are here within our industry, about the inability of Congress to get a long-term highway bill passed. Now, we are obviously, as Eugene said, we're a short 8 legislative days away from the expiration of the current bill. So it's quite obvious that we're going to need some sort of a short-term patch, and we would urge Congress to get busy with that, get that done. The shorter, the better, we think, and then we can move forward and get something done in a permanent way to fix some of the infrastructure problems we have. As you all know, this is no way to run a highway program. It's no way to run the government, and it's certainly not the way any of us run our businesses. This will be, according to many, about the 32nd or 33rd extension that we've had over the last 6 or 7 years, and you just can't run a modern system this way. And so we would urge them to look at a long-term plan, look at some sustainable and robust funding, and of course we're very, very supportive, much as the U.S. Chamber is, for a increase in the fuel tax and indexing it to inflation. You know, we've lost about 40% of our buying power over the last number of years because we haven't indexed the fuel tax for inflation. So we're having a very difficult time keeping up with the needs of our system today. And of course, we have more than just a passing interest in the highways of this country and our industry. This is where we do our business. So we're very, very interested in having them move forward expeditiously and get something on the table that we can all support and move forward with the highway program and then move on to the other issues that the country needs to work on.
Thank you, Pat. Paul, I want to bring you in. I'm certainly not going to ask you to speak for all of Congress, but you've heard the initial comments here. I also know that Congressman has introduced legislation regarding increasing the federal fuel tax. Pat mentioned that. It's a very popular option from the industry perspective, not one that appears to have much political clout right now. Wondering if you could speak a little bit to that as well and where that bill might stand. And again, thank you for joining us as well today.
Sure, glad to be here. Thanks for having me. And Pat really laid out the situation quite well. This is a situation that we've been in before. T21, the last 6-year reauthorization, expired in 2003. That was extended in 12 short-term measures. Safety Lou, not quite as long as T21 was extended 10 times. And it looks like we're coming up on our second extension of MAP 21, which I don't know if you can really call that a long-term bill at 17 months, or excuse me, 27 months. But there you have it. Congress should know by now that really the only solution that we're looking at should be raising the gas tax. Many blue ribbon panels and recommendations have pointed to the gas tax as the easiest, simplest way to raise the necessary revenue. As Pat mentioned, the fuel tax has lost 40% of its purchasing power due to inflation and rising fuel efficiency, and I want to note a specific statistic. Right now, in real terms, the fuel tax at 18.4 cents a gallon is barely higher than the first fuel tax ever levied in 1932 at 1 cent a gallon. So if you look at it that way, we're trying to fund 21st century infrastructure with a Depression-era level of investment, which is ridiculous. Congress has kicked the can down the road numerous times, and the shortfall of the Highway Trust Fund has continued to grow. CBO estimate, the Congressional Budget Office estimates that we're going to be looking at between a $12 and $18 billion shortfall a year going forward. And if we continue to extend, the gap is going to be ever more insurmountable. Congress has shown an inability to act, but my boss, Congressman Earl Blumenauer, has introduced what would be the first gas tax increase since 1993. H.R. 680, the Update Act. It would raise the gas tax 15 cents, phased in over 3 years, which would generate $210 billion over the next 10 years, which would provide enough money to make up the Highway Trust Fund shortfall and actually grow the program a little bit. So instead of just keeping our inadequate funding levels flat, we would actually be able to start to make some of the necessary improvements that we really need.
And Paul, where are we with that legislation? Is it expected to be, before the Ways and Means Committee anytime soon?
I would really like that. Chairman Ryan promised my boss that we would have a hearing in Ways and Means on transportation funding. That has not yet happened. Chairman Camp also promised a hearing. The Ways and Means Committee has not held a hearing on transportation funding since 2009. So that might give you a sense for why Congress has been unable to deal with this problem when you have the lawmakers who are involved not even taking a hard look at the issue.
So I just want to provide a brief recap here. We are coming up to May 31st as this initial deadline. I think there seems to be agreement here on the panel that no long-term solution is going to be coming up by then. It looks like this term that a lot of people use, the kicking of the can, will be forthcoming. We'll have to see how many months, possibly the end of the year. And then it sounds like this debate will go on. Also, the fuel tax has come up. The gasoline and diesel are levied at, there are different levels for them. I know a lot of the discussion Pat referenced, and in terms of the legislation, would increase both the gasoline and diesel taxes on the federal level. Pat, let me come back to you. You referenced the fuel tax. I also know in terms of ATA's perspective, you mentioned the Chamber and others that is one of a preferred method. I know you, the association has looked at other methods, or at least has expressed a willingness to strongly consider other methods as a way of sort of getting some sort of solution out. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to that.
Right, Neil. We embarked about a year ago here at ATA, and we put together a committee to look at highway funding, and understanding that the fuel tax would still be our preferred method of raising money for the highway system. We also acknowledge that the reality was that may be or may not be something that really could happen. So we looked at a variety of different funding options, and I would tell you that for the most part, we took kind of an all-of-the-above approach to that, and we said we would really seriously consider any reasonable option for raising money for the highway bill. Now, one of the things that we did say is the fact that there needs to be a user pay connection to highway funding. So there needs to be, and of course the fuel tax does that, and a variety of other things can do that as well. But there needs to have in this bill, as have been in prior bills, the connection between the folks that are using it and the folks that are paying for it. And beyond that, we would take a look at any of the options that have been brought forward, and there seem to be some that are new on the table and some that kind of fall off the table from time to time. And we have still of the mind that we're happy to take a look at whatever comes about. And the most important thing to us is that we get a bill passed and we get working on not only just fixing the potholes, but we've got to take a serious look at the additional capacity that our industry alone is going to need over the next 10 or 20 years, which is significant. And so, we're spending a lot of time today stopped in traffic, in bottlenecks around the country. And, a recent study that was done said that there was about $9.2 billion a year lost by our industry each year sitting in bottlenecks and traffic and congestion, which is really, really unfortunate. They're taking, for example, all of the benefits that we have with new engines and better emissions and all those sorts of environmental benefits that we've been able to get at a high cost, I might add, given them all in traffic, and we're burning fuel and not moving anywhere. So we're really anxious to get a host of options on the table, get the bill passed, and move forward.
So as part of Infrastructure Week, all sorts of emails and studies, press releases, comments have come out. I walked in this morning, got one from ARTBA talking about the fuel tax. The analysis on the state level shows gas tax supporters, meaning fuel tax, that includes diesel, not heard at the ballot box, and multi-page report to sort of continue pushing for the fuel tax increase. That one's from ARTBA. There are many that come out this week. I want to remind our viewers that they can communicate with us, share their thoughts at share@ttnews.com. They can also log in and comment on this article page. Leading up to the program and knowing the guests that we had a number of questions come in, some of them suggestions. I'm going to reserve my own personal judgment. I'm just going to put a couple out there as we continue the conversation in terms of some possible methods. I think if nothing else, it shows people do have the frustration is very real. It's very easy to see. It's just words on paper, or through an email. But it's very easy to see that people are really getting tired of this. Anyone could chime in. If not, just want to put it out there. They were asking about stopping lawmakers from cutting all non-highway related spending from future bills. Is there a way to make it illegal to tap into highway funds for anything other than highway spending? Just one asking, where is this funding going to come from, which we started to address. Will it only be for highways? That's one that people, the trucking audience and some of the other shippers and associations that have reached out to us ahead of this program seem to be wanting to know about what steps in trying to find a solution can we get. Is there a way to at least ensure anything that is, that any solution they do come up with is at least spent on highways? Do you feel that's something eventually we'll get to?
Well, I'll take look at that, Neil. And from our industry perspective, absolutely, that's a necessity for us. If we're going to pay higher taxes in one form or another, or we're going to get money from one place or another, we're going to insist that that money be used for highways. And you know, that's our position. It's always been our position, and we're going to hold fast to that. And that's, again, if I go back and talk about the link between a user pay system such as the fuel tax, that takes care of that problem. The people that are using the systems are the ones that are paying for it, and that's the way it ought to work. But in addition to that, if we're able to get funding from some other source, we're going to make a strong case that that money be exclusively used for roads.
And Neil, it's
yeah,
worth
please.
noting that the Paul Ryan, the Ways and Means chairman, he is very adamant when he spoke to reporters in April that there's not going to be a user fee increase. He said the gas tax increase is off the table, and so this short-term patch that they're working on is not going to have the gas tax increase, and the long-term bill, if the Republicans under Chairman Ryan and his team are in control, that's not something that's going to be in play. So right now, the lawmakers are scrambling to find other source of revenue.
I want to go to one other question for now. It comes from Victor Palmer, who is a student at TT. Certainly like to engage students. We're happy to see a few of them reach out to us on this. Who knows, they may be the ones that may finally solve the debate years and years from now, the way things are moving along. He asks, do you think it's a good time to start constructing and developing intelligent transportation systems or smart highway systems that would be compatible with vehicle-to-vehicle communication connected with cars and trucks? He's sort of taken this very somewhat futuristic approach, and I think it goes to show there is a younger generation there saying, where are we going next? We're talking about just how to keep things upright in some ways. I want to use that as a transition to the first video interview, a pre-recorded interview that we have. I was able to speak last week with Martin Daum. He's the president of Daimler Trucks North America, at an event in Las Vegas where they debuted, in this country at least, a autonomous driving vehicle, which I know generated a lot of buzz in the industry. Same time, it took a few minutes to discuss his concerns regarding the highway funding crisis and how it's affecting his company and making trucks and the industry as a whole. So let's go ahead and take a look at that now. Martin, I want to begin with, go back to our last time we were together in March, a presentation you gave. You spoke out about the highway bill, the need for highway funding legislation. I wonder if you could share with our viewers some of the comments that you made and why you felt the need as a business leader to speak out on the issue.
Yeah, when we talked last time, I just returned from Washington, where we had very good and intense discussions about the next round of emissions and the necessity to reduce CO2, which means to increase fuel efficiency for our customers. And it dawned to me that we are really haggling here about 2 or 3 percentage points. And then you look and see how many endless hours trucks are standing in traffic jams and wasting fuel there. And for me, to go on the one side for one of the strictest regulations we ever have on CO2, and on the other side, just let it sit there, literally. Sit the trucks there on the roads in traffic jams and waste fuel and pollute with CO2 the environment. That for me made no sense. So I used to speak up if something makes no sense to me.
Mm-hmm. You talked about some of the testing that Freightliner and Daimler Trucks does on the loop and how quickly you see some of the fuel economy losses. You could share a little bit about that?
Absolutely, because that was a background for my comment. So it's potentially important to let your readers or viewers hear about that. We do something which we call scientific testing. That means we really try to have scientific methods to figure out how our trucks perform and, more importantly, what new components do on those trucks. So we try really to measure fractions of percentages of fuel efficiency gains. When we do that, we ran always the same route. It's Portland, Pendleton, Portland, 420 miles back and forth, and it resembles a little bit the average North American routing our customers are doing. So it's an ideal route for that. We figured out that if we have one single, traffic jam in between, it screws up all the results. Mainly taking away all the advantages we might have from a new component. So we started to map the entire lane in 0.5 mile increments, and we look at the fuel efficiency of every single increment, and then we throw away everything where we see anomalies, meaning traffic jams, and focus just on the good stretches. But if you look on the bad stretches, you see ultimately that 1.5 mile of traffic jam takes away any fuel advantage you might have in a 3% fuel advantage gain over the entire length.
And it's certainly not unusual to be in the traffic jam now, something only projected to get worse.
Over 400 miles you run in a 1.5 mile traffic jam pretty often happened. And with trucking it's even more cumbersome than in pass cars, because in trucking you are not just idling that time, you always have to start accelerating your entire load, and then after a couple of feet you have to go to a standstill again, and then you have to re-accelerate and bring it to a standstill again, and that's potentially the worst part of the truck performance. Our trucks are designed to roll and to coast. That is what the future of fuel-efficient driving is, and therefore we need uncongested highways in North America, and we don't get that just by hoping and wishing. Hope is not a strategy. You have to do things different than yesterday, and that thing means we have to invest into our infrastructure, and that costs money, and then we have to get that money and really start to work and not just talk. Talk does not change the world. Work does.
There have been a lot of discussion about different methods about funding, whether it be fuel tax, other. That's something that you're interested in getting involved with, or is your message more, let's figure out a way to get this done because of the way it's hurting some of the larger goals that are going on?
As an industry leader, I want the things get done. I'm not a politician. There might be more implications. I was raised inside our company in the finance department, and when I was a controller, it was all about steering impulses. Set the right impulses, meaning reward the behavior you want and punish the behavior you don't want. And for me, then this game we have on the one side the excise tax on trucks, where we basically punish new technology. Because new technology comes with a cost. If it would be cost-free, we would always have it on the truck. So any new technology comes with a cost. So we punish that with a higher excise tax, because you have to pay excise tax on that. And on the other side, when you waste fuel, you get rewarded by a very low fuel tax. So for me, the first move would be get rid of the excise tax and increase the fuel tax. And if you need some more money for the highway bill, then you have to get it out of fuel.
Welcome back. I want to thank Martin Daum for taking the time to speak with us about the highway bill. As I mentioned, this took place at the Las Vegas Motor Speedway. There were about 200 journalists attending this autonomous driving truck, clamoring for his time. I'm very appreciative that he took the time with TT to speak on the highway bill, and I think it underscores the importance of the issue. And in the middle of all this, he felt the need to talk about it. I also want to thank Dave Giroux and Kim Jommer for their help in making sure that interview would happen. One thing I found interesting from his interview, I heard him speak about this also at his comments at the Mid-America Truck Show in March. I just asked him about the highway bill. He sometimes, that is such a complex issue on its own that sometimes we could think of it in its own bubble. He immediately ties it into, he references the greenhouse gas rules, he references anything involving the fuel tax. He references it to the excise tax on new trucks as sort of a penalty on purchasing some of the more modern, cleaner, fuel-efficient trucks that are out there. Though he didn't reference it in this interview, in the past the company has referenced trade legislation, which I believe Senator Reid recently referenced may be held up in terms of some of the highway funding, at least in terms of some comments that he made. As just another aspect, the larger picture that's going on, and a feeling that this domino is holding up a lot of other efforts going on. Also very quickly want to mention there's another piece, completely separate piece of the interview about the event that took place in Las Vegas that's available on our website. Time allows, we may get into it a little bit more later on during this program. Pat, I want to come back to you. You were listening to that. I know you're familiar with some of the comments. Also, not only his comments, you were referencing something in regards to the student Victor and some of his looking ahead into what might come on the highways. You want to address that a little bit further.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. And I found the interview was fascinating, and the technology, of course, is state of the art, and it really gives you the ability to begin to think about what could be as we move into the future. But back to Victor's question, which is, should we begin to think about highways of the future and different ways of building roads, and should they be smart roads? And Victor, the short answer to that question is yes, we should. We need to get this highway bill behind us, and then we need to begin to broaden the conversation. We need to say what should things look like 5, 10, or 20, or 50 years down the road. And obviously, we're running a system today that it's far beneath all of the technology that's available to us out there. So we need to broaden that, and we need to broaden the conversation about not having a highway bill, but we need to talk about a transportation plan, which encompasses all modes and all kinds of different things, because our businesses today are very multimodal, and we've got to address those kinds of things and the bottlenecks and the things that come with those. And I'll leave you with one other statistic that I heard yesterday from the Vice President. He was addressing Infrastructure Week, and he said in the 1950s the U.S. spent about 4% of GDP on infrastructure. Today that number is less than 1%, and I think that's something we have to take a real hard look at and say, are we giving our infrastructure all that it's due? And clearly the answer to that is not, and then we have to move forward with the debate about how do we get it back to where it needs to be, and talk about the things that Victor mentions here about a new transportation system.
Interesting, Pat. I want to remind everyone they can communicate with us still at share@ttnews.com. Send in your questions or comments. You can also log in, comment on this page. Before we move on, I know while we were listening to that interview, Paul, we briefly were talking about the question earlier, the suggestion regarding the money spent on highways, and you want to make one point on that. So why don't you go ahead?
Yeah. Thank you, Neil. I did want to return to this because this has been a fairly contentious debate in recent years about money for the Highway Trust Fund being spent only on highways, and I want to make clear how important investments spent on transit and alternative modes of transportation are to our whole transportation network. We have to go back to President Ronald Reagan, who established the mass transit account within the Highway Trust Fund, with 20% of fuel tax revenues going to the transit account. He saw the congestion on our roadways and the bottlenecks, as Pat mentioned, which cost our economy billions of dollars a year, and saw investment in inner city and urban area public transportation as a way to reduce this, and it does. And the investments that Congress and the federal government continues to make in public transportation, in bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, take cars off our roadways, reduce congestion, and especially when you look at the growth of this nation over the next 40 years, we're going to be moving twice as much freight on our roadways. And we're also going to be adding 100 million people. We're not going to be able to just pave our way out of this problem with more highways. We need to invest. We need to be investing in many different types of transportation. So I'm glad that Pat mentioned the importance of looking at multi-modes and other investments.
Okay, we're going to come back to looking at what a long-term highway bill one day might look like in a second. But thus far, we've looked at it from the federal level. We've gotten a number of questions leading up. One from Jason Stone of Volvo, just as we were going on the air, saying, "Hey, what about the states? Is this some sort of battle between them? How is it collected? Is there one have a better argument? Are there pros and cons?" And I don't know if it quite works that way. Maybe you guys can speak to it. But we do know that states are also frustrated. Many of them are taking some of their own steps to begin to address the problem on some level. Michigan was the latest state to at least attempt to do something. They put to a ballot a measure that would raise the sales tax, tweak the tax structure a little bit, and that would go toward infrastructure in the state. That was voted down last week, but did show at least the latest example of a state sort of rolling their hands up and trying to do something on its own. Eugene, I know that is something that you and the government reporting team track pretty closely as this debate is playing out. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit more on the state side, what's going on while they wait for a federal government agreement.
Yeah, in recent years, many states' departments of transportation have really pushed ahead with some very intricate and large-scale funding plans. And I know that in New Hampshire, for instance, last year the legislature approved a gas tax increase, and I know in my home state of New Jersey, lawmakers are scrambling to finance the state transportation fund, and ultimately, basically all the DOT directors in the country are in agreement that they would like to see a stronger federal role play. And I know that polling your home state of Oregon, they have a very interesting pilot going on the vehicle miles traveled, VMT for short. And where are we? What's the latest on that? Do you have an update?
Sure. Thanks, Eugene. Well, Oregon actually gave the nation the first gas tax dedicated to road construction in 1919. And Oregon looks like it's going to be the first state to transition away from the fuel tax entirely. For the last 15 years now, they've been working on testing a pilot, an alternative user fee to the gas tax. They call it a road usage charge because this is a user fee, a RUC. And this summer, the Oregon Department of Transportation is embarking on the latest pilot project. This is going to be a 5,000 all-volunteer pilot where participants are going to be charged for how many miles they drive, not how many times they have to fill up at the pump. They'll be charged at a rate of 1.5 cents per mile. And this is expected to test how such a fee can be implemented and levied on a state level, and what types of reporting people are going to be comfortable with. And I want to be clear, because there have been a lot of privacy issues raised, that the Oregon ACLU was involved in drafting the legislation, and they testified in support of the legislation creating the pilot. So there really are no privacy violations, but at the same time, concerns exist, and people need to test them out and see what works best. And I hope that other states follow suit in the near future. I know California is looking at a 7,000 volunteer pilot in the next couple of years, and more to come.
Pat, just to be clear, from the trucking perspective, things like VMT or PPP, the public-private partnerships, may be part of a larger solution that would be considered. Clearly not at the top of trucking's wish list. Is that correct?
but I'll tell you, I think the general feeling is that we're anxious to hear about the pilot project. We're interested in whether or not this is a workable solution. I think there are a number of things that cause us to pause a little, and some of the security and the privacy issues obviously are some of the first things that people think of, and of course not only from a personal perspective but also from a company perspective. There's some information about individual businesses that we wouldn't want to have shared with others. But and I think the other thing that I generally hear from people when they talk about VMT is the ability to collect from that many taxpayers without a great deal of evasion and that sort of thing. So, but I think that's certainly worthy of a pilot, and it's worthy of discussion. And when it's all done and we put it all together, like a number of other proposals, we can take a look at it and see if it's something that we indeed can support.
Thank you for the clarification. Eugene, let's come back to you on the state side.
So, but again, the bottom line is that what the states national and with Carlos Bracero Montrose, the executive director of the Utah Department of Transportation, who's also a senior member of AASHTO, where he really focused on his concerns about efforts on Capitol Hill, so-called devolution legislation that would minimize the federal role and press the states to really take ownership of their transportation duties. And he testified before the Senate EPW panel earlier this year. And I think we have a clip of my conversation with him.
If the answer is we can't get together, we're unable to come up with a solution, then in fact devolution may be a solution, because states will then individually take care of their needs. But I maintain that I need every state in the country to have a good transportation system, because I have companies here in Utah that depend on a good functioning road system in Arkansas and Maryland. It's important because we're moving products around the country and around the world. And so I would encourage Congress to define what they want to achieve as a nation with our transportation system. And this is not easy, it's hard, but nothing easy is worth doing anyhow. We need to do the hard things, and I would just encourage Congress to keep at it. I know that many members of Congress understand the need for transportation, and they're committed to that long-term look. It's just we have a lot of things moving right now in Congress. It's very complicated, and Senator Hatch, who chairs Finance, is committed to a long-term funding for transportation, but trying to do it in the context of tax reform. That's a very complicated thing to do. So I'm confident in the long run. I think the short term, we're going to need to figure out ways to get through the short term so we can start to get to that big picture. I think fundamentally, we have to think about the principles that we want to have behind how to fund transportation. And I believe one of the principles needs to be a user base. The better we can do to connect the use of the system with and make the use of the system tied into the cost of using that system, the better. I believe that's a very strong principle we should all support. So the gas tax has done a really good job of that, and it's been a pretty good user fee. I believe, right now we're seeing a lot of great evolution in fuels and fuel efficiency of vehicles. And what we're starting to see today and will grow into the future is a little bit of a disconnect between the users and the impacts to the system and the cost they're paying to use that system. Now, I believe it's absolutely the right thing to do to come up with more fuel-efficient vehicles, to look at alternative fuel vehicles, but that's where I believe is that disconnect that's starting to happen now and will increase in the future. So I believe fundamentally in the future we're going to see more of that user-based fee is going to be tied more to that direct usage. And I'm very interested in the pilot that Oregon has going on and California has going on right now in that vehicle miles traveled studies that they're doing. Because I think, in the next, I don't know if it's 10, 15, 20 years, that will become the direct user fee that I think is important for the system.
And then, finally, if we have if we have a window of time to get to that ideal approach, that new way to get funding for transportation, what do we do in the meantime? Do we, keep just shifting money from the, general fund? Are states like Utah and others, what do you think is going to happen in the meantime?
Yeah, that's critical. We need to have a bridging to that, and I would encourage us to break the habit of going to the general fund. I remember for years prior to the general fund backfilling the trust fund, we kept trying to work on keeping that door closed to not allow trust fund monies, highway trust fund monies, to be used for other needs. And here we are opening the door in the other direction and saying, bring the general funds in. I think that's a slippery slope that I would encourage us all not to try to follow in the future. I understand we've been trying to backfill, and that's important. But I would encourage states and the federal government to take a look at what Utah just did. Our legislature and governor just did a reform of the gas tax here in Utah, and I believe it's going to be a bridging formula for us. And essentially what we did is we sit at a 24.5-cent gas tax right now. And what we did is we converted that gas tax to a percentage. And we set the floor at $2.45, so it doesn't go below $2.45. And what will happen is we'll multiply a 12% fee basically a percentage, times that 245, and that immediately gave us a 4.9 cent increase in the gas tax. But it's indexed now to the rack's price. So as the rack price, the wholesale price of fuel increases, that 12%, as that increases, that 12% will generate more revenue. They capped it at a 40-cent equivalent, but that floor will also be moving at the same time with CPI. And so we're going to have the ability for our state gas tax to more, in a better way, keep up with inflation and be able to allow us to keep our pavements and bridges in better condition. And the taxpayers in Utah will ultimately pay less for the transportation services. I think that was a very good model, and I know other states are looking at that as well. You know, it was amazing because I think it takes time to get there, but I think the trust that the legislature and the public have in the Department of Transportation to get the best return on the public's investment really played a big part in us getting this passed this last session. You know, we're pretty good at saying, with these inputs, with this dollar amount, these are the outcomes you're going to see. You know, so we don't increase staff at all. There's no overhead. This is purely going to get product on the road. And when the public sees how their money's being invested and they trust you, I believe they'll make the right decisions to invest because it'll cost them less in the long run. If the answer is...
Welcome back. We want to thank Carlos for taking the time to speak with us, providing an additional perspective on this debate. I also want to mention that Eugene's entire interview with Carlos will be available on our website later on today, along with a replay of this entire program.
Neil, if I can, I'd like to respond a little bit to some of the comments earlier about devolution and where ATA and the industry stands on that. I think that there's a good deal of frustration at the state level about the Congress's inability to get these things done, and sometimes I think that results in them thinking they might be able to do it better themselves, and in many ways that may very well be true. But we believe that there is a strong role for the federal government in the interstate highway system. So in the federal program, we think that it's important that there's collaboration between the federal government and the states in order to create a network that all of the residents and businesses around this country can use for interstate commerce. And we've seen a lot of activity at the state level. Nearly a dozen states, Eugene had mentioned earlier, have made some move towards increasing their fuel tax or some other legislative remedy to bring in more money into their highway trust fund. And we think those are courageous votes. And if you go through the list of those things, those particular states, you'll find that many of them are quite conservative, and you wouldn't necessarily expect that a tax increase would be a thing that they would be willing to do. But they simply sat down and did the math and determined that they needed more money in their system in order to provide a highway infrastructure that their citizens deserve. And I think that's important. And one last point, if I can, is to talk about the system and that there really are no bottlenecks that stop at city boundaries or county boundaries or even state lines. Many of these things are multi-jurisdictional. So there needs to be a federal component in there that can help set a plan, and we can fix these sort of things and work across different jurisdictional lines. So I think that's incredibly important that we keep that element in the highway bill.
Well, Pat, I want to assuage your fears. I think Congress has made it pretty clear that the federal partnership is not going away. Last Congress, even though the Transportation Empowerment Act had some 50 co-sponsors and I believe 28 senators voted for it when we passed the most recent extension, the authorizers this time around have made it very clear that the gas tax, the fuel taxes are going to remain where they are. The program is not going to get devolved to the states. Chairman Schuster has had multiple hearings to bring in state and local partners to show the importance of the federal program to them. And even Chairman Inhofe of the Environment and Public Works Committee, who claims that he coined the term devolution in the first place a couple decades back. He says that he was wrong then, and that's not the way that Congress is going to do things this time. So I think that's a win for all of us.
And it's worth pointing out that, when you talk to people on the Hill, everybody's saying that the proponents of devolution don't have the votes. They don't have the votes this
Sure.
year and in the near future to get this going. As it makes for a platform for them to stand on and advocate for when the highway legislation gets to the floors. But right now, it's really not going to go anywhere.
We have a couple of viewers. I'm getting some feedback here, just seeking a few clarifications on some of the funding mechanisms we've been talking about. In terms of the road user fee, it was asking about would a fuel tax be eliminated, or would there be a double taxation? I'm assuming that's sort of in relation to the pilot program that was sort of outlined with Oregon, if you have any comment.
That's a great question. And so for these folks right now who are going to be doing the pilot in Oregon, they will be paying their state and federal gas tax at the pump, but they will be getting a quarterly rebate, I believe it's quarterly, from the state DOT for the gas tax that they paid. I think ultimately, if we were to bring such a system to scale on the federal level, which I think we will have to do in the future, there would not be a gas tax in addition. This would be the new user fee for our transportation system.
I got another one. We've got another one from John asking, in relation to our discussion, thoughts about with the roadblocks on the fuel tax and otherwise, about public-private partnerships, and about would you recommend or promote the government establishing a dedicated fund for them? I know that can be a complicated issue. Just want to follow up with the feedback that's coming from the outside about public-private partnerships.
Well, Neil, I'll take a whack at that. It depends on how they're put together. There have been successful things that have happened around the country, and there have been others that have not. So I guess the answer to the question is the devil's in the details. I think that we would take an honest look at any proposal that anybody would bring forward, but we'd have to be comfortable with all the various aspects of that, and ultimately. You still have to pay for the project. So the question is, do these give you another avenue to be able to do that? Sometimes we tend to think that infrastructure banks and public-private partnerships are money from heaven that once you get them, you don't have to worry about them anymore. But the reality is that you got to pay for them, and you may get the money up front, but you have to have a mechanism to come in behind there and pay for all the capital that you've used.
That's a great point, Pat, and I want to point out that even advocates, the most outspoken advocates for public-private partnerships, have been clear that it's really a financing mechanism, not a funding mechanism. And even if there were to be a national P3 procurement office, the types of programs that P3 advocates thinks would really help, it would still only cover about 10% of the need for our surface transportation infrastructure. So I think P3s definitely have to be looked at, but that's not the whole solution.
Exactly, it's part of the toolbox, and there's going to be there's an expectation there's going to be language in the next long-term highway bill, that really touches on P3s, but right now it's not considered to be the anchor solution for long-term financing. We have a couple other funding and related questions coming in. I want to turn to some of the comments and questions we received in the days leading up to the program. I think, again, it's established we're not going to be getting a long-term bill, certainly by the end of this month, and we're going to have to wait and see when. With that said, people either were seeking some clarification, some suggestions, some forecasting as to what might be in something, that a long-term bill, should there be one 5, 6, 7, 50 years, that there's more than just dollars in it, that there are pieces of legislation within that goes towards building an infrastructure system. Wondering about what maybe some of the hopes or beliefs of what that might look at one day should it happen.
I'll jump in.
Sure.
I alluded to this before, but I really think that the link between the fuel tax as a user fee has been broken by increasing fuel efficiency, changing travel trends, and the fuel tax really is an increasingly regressive tax. You have wealthier Americans who are able to buy newer cars that are certainly going to be more fuel efficient. They're able to buy hybrids and electric vehicles. So those folks, my boss's constituents in many cases, are paying less and less to drive on our roadways than people who might live in rural areas who are paying more and more. So I really think that a long-term bill needs to incentivize pilots like Oregon is running, pilots like other states are looking at, to look at alternative user fee-based mechanisms that can pay for this program into the future.
Pat, I think you want to comment about some of the things that in a hypothetical long-term bill you would like to.
That's right, Neil.
see
We're
from
gonna
the
we're gonna
industry
write the
perspective.
bill right here, right now, and
They'll look back on this one day and they'll say, "Look how smart you were."
we'll take it on down to the hill and see if we can't get it done. You know, there's a number of different things that ATA has identified as that are important to us. Obviously, a highway bill itself is incredibly important for us with the proper amount of funding, and it's got to be a robust and sustainable and reliable source of funding. Obviously, the hours of service is an issue for us. We have a temporary fix for the hours of service, but we'd like to fix the 34-hour restart problem on a permanent basis. So we're eager to do that. We're seeking some reform to the CSA program. We've got, we think, a program with all the right motives, but we've got some things in there that we don't think work very well. So we're interested in fixing some of those things so that the CSA scores reflect the safe operation of our members, and that there is a link between who's going to have a crash and what kind of CSA score they have, and we don't think that exists as it should today. Obviously, MAP 21 put together a freight program, and we'd like to see that extended and moved into this bill, and most importantly, it needs to be funded. And this would give us an opportunity to look at the bottlenecks around the country, and you know, they really happen on a very small amount of the highway lanes, but they produce an incredible amount of congestion and added cost to folks there. One thing we'd like to see not in the bill is a provision to increase tolling or give more ability for folks to toll the existing interstate highway system. And just a couple more, Neil. We have a good list of things this year. We have a proposal that would add hair testing to the drug and alcohol testing regime, and so carriers would have an opportunity to use that as an option, not as a mandatory thing, but if they found that was a better system for them, that they would have the ability to use that and have that endorsed by the government. And finally, we would like to begin a conversation about what we do with 18 to 21-year-old drivers in this country. As we all know, that currently they're able to do intrastate transportation, but they're not able to cross the state line. And so in many cases, they can drive all the way across Texas or up and down the coast of California, but they can't drive from Virginia to Maryland, which may be a much shorter deal. So we're looking at what kind of potentially a graduated driver's license program looks like, so that we can begin to introduce these kids, because we have a real problem with a driver shortage in this country, and it's all expectations are that it's going to gradually get worse as our workforce ages. So we want to very responsibly take a look at what we can do with those sort of things. So you wanted a highway bill, there you go.
Paul, I'm sure there was a lot broken up into pretty specific pieces. I'm sure up on Capitol Hill, you would hear a lot of different lists like this, both from trucking and from other stakeholders, I guess, in this. How does Capitol Hill sort of go about sorting through something like this when beginning to think maybe one day about a long-term bill that is so complicated and expensive as a long-term highway bill could be?
Well, you know, Neil, I would have to say that we really are not doing that right now, and I want to thank Secretary Fox for really making this point every opportunity he can, that the conversation over the funding, over the Highway Trust Fund, has really hijacked the conversation that we should be having about improvements that we can make to our national transportation system, whether it's funding a freight program, whether it's making freight flow more efficiently, all sorts of things like that. We really aren't able to take a look at that. The Department of Transportation put out a 30-year framework. There's a lot of stuff to like in there, but nobody's really taking a hard look, because everyone just keeps talking about where's the money. So Congressman Blumenauer sits on Ways and Means, and it's his job to find the money. And one more plug for my boss's bill. We think that we've got the solution.
All right, I want to ask at least one more question here. someone that looked at this short-term versus long-term in a slightly different way. They wanted to know our opinions. If there was some sort of funding certainty, as I think all sides of the debate are seeking, how might that change investment not only in infrastructure, but also in vehicle purchases, whether it be Class 8 trucks or off-highway? Do you have any sense as to how it may be costing us in the short term by not being able to find a long-term solution?
Well, Neil, I'll take a look at that. I think there's no question that the method in which we're using to fund the highways today with short-term extension and short-term patches is causing a great deal of problems. It's causing uncertainty at the state level. State DOT director after state DOT director is relaying stories about having to delay projects or even stop projects or cancel projects because they just don't have the certainty of a funding program, and that trickles all the way down through the economy. And so if we don't have the ability to look ahead and see that we have a highway program that's going to sustain us into the future 4, 5, 6 years, we have that uncertainty creeps into our business, and I think you would find that with almost every trucking executive in the country to say that we need to get this done, we need to get it behind us to give them some level of confidence that we're going to take this economy and grow it in a manner in which we think it can be done.
One other question that has come in is, what else do you guys have planned for Infrastructure Week? And along with that was sort of suggesting, okay, I feel I'm caught up to speed. How do I track it? What's the next thing? So much is coming at me. How do I get involved, or how do I track how this is going to play out besides coming to ttnews.com and reading Transport Topics? So let's start with what else might be planned for Infrastructure Week, and then where does this debate go from here?
Sure, I'll jump in. I would note that it's also Bike to Work Week, National Bike to Work Week. Congressman Blumenauer is a big champion for bicycle infrastructure and pro-bicycle policies, so he'll be speaking at Bike to Work Day at Freedom Plaza in Washington, D.C. on Friday. As I mentioned, investments in bicycle infrastructure make our communities safer and more vibrant, so we're also focusing on that type of infrastructure.
And tomorrow on Capitol Hill, there's going to be Advocacy Day as part of Infrastructure Week, and a very pro-cycling former Secretary of Transportation, Ray LaHood, is going to be leading that kickoff event. But if we can circle back quickly, yesterday's during the kickoff of Infrastructure Week, it really struck me that Secretary Fox said that what we need right now to solve this immediate crisis is basically having a person shoot a miracle shot at the buzzer, and he said we need a LeBron James to hit a buzzer beater. And it just, I just kept reflecting on that we're in a situation right now in our political landscape that, our DOT chief is saying that we need, a last minute breakthrough. It's just, that's the state of play that, he's laying out for us.
I just want to give our guests here, if they have any parting comments or suggestions, predictions of how this may play out as we hit this next deadline and sort of begin to set up for what are likely to be more deadlines to come.
Well, Neil, I'll give you a prediction, and then when I'm done, I'll let the expert Paul here tell you what's really going to happen. But I think that it's most likely that there'll be a what we would call a short-term extension that will happen, and it's most likely to go into December. That's what we're hearing. There was some talk earlier about maybe July or sometime this summer, but it appears as though that is getting pushed back, and you never know until it's done. But it appears as though that's what's going on, and that's unfortunate because then we move into 2016 if we don't get it done by the end of the year, and I think it's very, very difficult to have real candid conversations around this sort of an issue during an election year. So we're hoping that the sooner the better, and we'll get something done here.
That's absolutely right. Congressman Blumenauer strongly believes that a shorter-term patch is the way to go. We need to keep the pressure on. But ultimately, we've been stuck in this holding pattern of extensions, and I'd like to think that if Congress were to have a LeBron James, as people joked yesterday, to come in and hit that miracle shot, I think what's more important is for Congress to hear from small business owners and executives and your members, Pat, across the country, that this is something that needs to get done, and these extensions are not helping anyone. And rather than wait for some savior, chairman of a committee in Congress, to lead the way, I would encourage the American public, who's really bearing the brunt of this, to tell Congress that they need to get down to business.
And we should point out that LeBron James is not going to run for Congress anytime soon. So
Does not appear that way. Okay, so I want to thank Paul and Pat for taking time today. We're going to see Eugene again later this week. But before we sign off today, I again want to thank our sponsors, Ryder and Clean Energy. Again, I want to thank Pat, Paul, and Eugene for joining me, as well as Martin and Carlos for making time to share their thoughts. I also want to remind our viewers that we have a special, as I mentioned, LiveOnWeb Reporters Roundtable on Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern, featuring Eugene and 3 other transportation reporters from national news organizations covering Capitol Hill. They will look back on all of Infrastructure Week and provide the latest insight onto where highway funding is heading. Please visit liveonweb.ttnews.com for more information. During that program, we will announce details of our next full Live on Web program for June. Finally, I want to mention we have a special subscription offer for our viewers today. Please visit liveonweb.ttnews.com/subscribe for details. And if you have enjoyed the program today, consider joining our fan club at liveonweb.ttnews.com/fan club. You might just earn yourself a free mug. Until next time, I'm Neil Apt. Thank you for joining us.